Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Dartmouth's 2024 Election Speaker Series, tonight featuring the 48th Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence. I am Justin Anderson, Dartmouth's Senior Vice President for Communications. I think I'm the first, I am the first Senior Vice President for Communications. The speaker series, this speaker series leading up to Election Day is really the type of event that really makes me love Dartmouth. On the eve of an important election, we're able to bring policy leaders, public officials, analysts from across the political spectrum to our campus to discuss in intimate settings the most pressing issues of the day. You know, it's a cliche at this point to say that Dartmouth has a ringside seat to the New Hampshire primary every 4 years, but we really do, and it has contributed to our culture where we want and expect to see our elected officials up close, to ask questions, to probe, to listen, and to take the measure of those who are seeking to lead this country. It's also a wonderful attribute of Dartmouth that we do this for our students in the classroom. This series is associated with a government and public policy course, the 2024 election, taught by Professors Russ Muirhead, Herschel Naklis, and Bill Woolforth, two of whom are serving as moderators for tonight's event. The first is Russ Muirhead. Russ teaches political philosophy in the government department, where he is the Robert Clements Professor of Democracy and Politics. He himself is also an elected official. He serves in the New Hampshire House of Representatives, where he focuses on election law. Herschel is the Associate Director and Senior Policy Fellow at the Nelson A. Rockefeller Center for Public Policy and the Social Sciences, and a research assistant professor in the Department of Government. He studies and teaches public policy, American politics, and law, focusing on health policy, regulation, and political institutions. In addition to those two fine gentlemen, I'm thrilled that my friend Emma Wolf, who is the Chief of Staff to the President at New York University, has returned to Dartmouth, at least for the day, to participate in today's event. Prior to her current role, Emma was the Vice President, another Vice President, of Government and Community Relations at Dartmouth. And before that, she was the invisible hand that ran New York City under Mayor Bill de Blasio. Before we get started, I'd like to say some important thank yous. First, thank you all for joining us today. I'm thrilled to see that we have such a full house. I love that people are so interested and enthused to come see this event, so thank you for taking the time to be here. I also want to thank everyone who chose to log in and watch on Zoom. Hi, Mom. Thanks for watching. And also thanks to Professors Woolforth and Muirhead and Naklis and Emma Wolf for coming up with the idea for this class. It's a fabulous idea, well-timed, and so far has been a great addition and wonderful to have on our campus. I'd also like to thank Fielding Asensa, Madison Peel, and Devora Greenberg-Kelling for making this all happen on the logistical side. Without them, we would be standing, I don't know where we'd be standing, but not here. So thank you all. I swear I'm almost done, but before we begin in earnest, I want to remind everyone, in the spirit of Dartmouth Dialogues, please remember that Dartmouth is committed to protecting free expression and peaceful dissent and creating space for a multiplicity of voices to be heard in pursuit of learning and idea generation. I ask that you please not interfere or disrupt today's program, including by preventing attendees from seeing or hearing our guest and our moderators, or interfering with our guests and our moderators' ability to speak or be heard. So, with that, it is my pleasure to welcome Vice President Mike Pence as our 2024-2025 Class of 1930 Fellow. This fellowship was established by members of the Class of 1930 to continue the Dartmouth tradition begun by President Ernest Martin Hopkins of bringing distinguished men and women to campus for brief visits and then squeezing as much out of them as possible while they are here for the benefit of our students and our community. In addition to delivering public remarks, the Class of 1930 Fellows meet with students and faculty over several days in group sessions and during class. Vice President Pence joins a distinguished group of recent Fellows to have visited Dartmouth this year, including former Representative Liz Cheney and former Representative Adam Kinzinger. Mike Pence was born in Columbus, Indiana on June 7, 1959, into a family that epitomized the American dream, instilling in him values of hard work, faith, and family. After graduating from Hanover College, no relation, and Indiana University Law School, he embarked on a multifaceted career, including law practice, hosting a talk show, serving as a congressman for 6 terms, and championing limited government and fiscal responsibility. Pence then was elected the 50th governor of Indiana, focusing on tax cuts, job creation, education reform, and infrastructure investment while maintaining fiscal responsibility. His roles in Indiana led to his selection as candidate for, and ultimately his service as the 48th Vice President of the United States. Pence's conservative philosophy, inspired by Ronald Reagan, led to his founding of Advancing American Freedom, which advocates for faith, family, and liberty as foundational American values. With that, I'd like to invite you all up to the stage and begin the program.
You can go first.
I think you're right here, sir. Am I here? Yes, you are.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thanks, So before we get started in earnest, it's worth noting that we made you schlep up here on Halloween, and in the event that you arrived in Hanover without a costume, a bipartisan coalition of our students ran out to buy this $90 sweatshirt for you. So here you go.
And it's an XXL. Thank you very much.
That's on our students.
It's not far off. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. It's very kind.
So thanks for joining us. And just to start us off, we think it's worth noting that in a room like this, a range of folks might be thinking, hey, here's a guy who I strongly disagreed with on important policies, who maybe at times I even felt anger toward, but here's also a public servant who saved the Republic from despotism on January 6th. And I'm wondering if you could speak to... And just to start us off, we're wondering if you could speak to the core values that sort of link those two things, those policy ideas that some folks here might disagree with, to your service to the Republic on January 6th.
Well, thank you very much. How about a round of applause for these distinguished current and former members of the faculty. Thank you to Dartmouth. Thank you to the Rockefeller Center. I'm very honored to be here. We've had a terrific day. I've decided to stay for homecoming. I'm terribly alarmed to see that bonfire being built, and somebody else ought to be here to man a hose. But thank you for your generous comments. I would tell you that for me, it all really begins with a foundation of faith and principle, and then partisanship. I've said to people for many years, I'm a Christian, a conservative, and a Republican in that order. And I hope as people look at my career, they can see that I've acted in such a way that reflects a sincere commitment to each of those things. I came to a personal faith in Jesus Christ when I was a freshman in college in Hanover, Indiana. Told your president today I couldn't have gotten into Dartmouth. But but that was the most important decision I ever made in my life. I started in politics as a Democrat. Believe it or not, I have great admiration to this day for Jimmy Carter as a leader and his service to the country. I remember when I met President Carter, I said, I hope it doesn't offend you for me to tell you, not only do I respect your service to the country, but I actually voted for you. And he was a little surprised. But you know, when I heard the voice of Ronald Reagan in the 1980s, I heard the Midwest values of a strong national defense, limited government, fiscal responsibility, traditional values, and I joined the Reagan Revolution. But fast forward to that fateful day, those decisions ultimately did inform how we approached that moment. And the defining moment for me wasn't January of 2021, it was January of 2017. I put my left hand on Ronald Reagan's Bible, and I raised my right hand. And I swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. It's the same oath my son, who's a major in the Marine Corps, took. It's the same oath every public official, including present company on stage, will take. It was a promise that I made to the American people, standing looking out over the National Mall, but it ended with a prayer. So help me God. And so I saw it as a promise, an oath that I had taken, and a promise that I had made to all of you, but also to God. And so in the run-up to that fateful day that I never could have conceived would have occurred and unfolded the way that it did, to me, I was just determined to keep my oath. The Bible says he keeps his oath even when it hurts. And I know something about that. But at the end of the day, I really believe by that foundation of faith, but also a belief in the Constitution of the United States. I mean, if I had one word for the students here today, is that if you want to understand the extraordinary success of the American experiment, going on 250 years, but since 1789, you need to look no further than the Constitution of the United States and to the ideals enshrined in the Declaration of Independence. It is that Constitution, our founders wrote it. It was a form of government. It became the most successful charter in human freedom in the history of the world, created the freest and most prosperous nation on earth. And I believe the Constitution still provides the framework to resolving our differences and moving forward to a boundless American future. And those were the convictions that drove me to that day.
And speaking of January 6th, I wonder if you could just share with us, Mr. Vice President, what it felt like on that day to see what you saw, to hear what you heard, and share with us when you realized it was actually a fateful day, for instance.
Well, I can tell you that I was on the floor of the Senate when my Secret Service agent came and said, there's some people that have breached the Capitol and we need to move you out of the building. And I served in Congress for 12 years. I had great confidence in the Capitol Hill Police. I knew that they would handle any situation. Incredibly brave men and women. So I said, look, I'll just wait in my office across the hall until they get things squared away. But as we watched on the small television set in my office across from the Senate, I have to tell you, I wasn't afraid, but I was angry. I mean, looking at people smashing windows in the Capitol, looking at people climbing into the seat of our government, the people's house, I found myself thinking, not this, not here, not in America. And the Secret Service came to me and said, sir, we need to get you out of the building. And I would tell you that, Russ, I had a sense of resolve like I've had a few times in my life. I was determined to stay at my post. I was determined to finish the work that we were tasked to do under the Constitution. And so I told my Secret Service agent, I said, we're here, we're fine, we're not leaving. And then he came in about the third time. And he said, you need to leave. The crowd is moving this way. And I said, I'm not leaving. You don't understand. I said, I'm not going to give that crowd the sight of a 16-car motorcade speeding away from the Capitol. It's not going to happen. And we were staring at each other. My daughter, who was there, Charlotte, who writes for the Daily Wire and is a brilliant writer and gifted, standing in between me and the Secret Service agents, he said, well, is there somewhere else in the Capitol we could go? And it kind of broke the tension. And our lead agent said, well, we could go to the parking garage. That's secured, and that's still in the building. And I said, okay, we'll go there. And it was there that we convened. I reached out to the leadership of the Congress and I was determined to play whatever role the leadership in Congress wanted me to play to facilitate a resolution that day. And I will tell you, January 6th was a tragic day. But because of the courage of law enforcement, because of their resolve, I believe it became a triumph of freedom when we reconvened the House and the Senate on the very same day, and we finished the people's work for the peaceful transfer of power under the Constitution of the United States. I said on the floor of the Senate that day when we reconvened, I said, the world is now going to witness the resilience of our institutions. And never doubt that if we will, each of us be leaders that keep our oath, if each of us will do our jobs, fulfill our obligations under the Constitution of the United States, it will always be so in this country. But that was my experience.
Thank you.
Mr. Vice President, in your book, you touched throughout on...
I'm so glad you read my book.
I am too. I am too, actually. It was terrific.
It's available on Amazon.com.
There you go.
Emma's been talking about it
In
for
Kindle
weeks.
and in hardcover and in paperback.
Hardcover and paperback. And on the discount table at Walmart.
Right, there you go. There you go. So I was interested in the theme that you kept coming back to in the book about working across the aisle, dialogue across difference. It started for you on the home front. You were in a split ticket household. Your parents were one a Democrat, one a Republican. You told this story that I thought was amazing about how you had a really challenging policy topic before you. This was before you were in the White House, having to do with, I believe it was Syrian refugees at the time. And your daughter was disturbed, troubled, and at first you were struggling with how to communicate, and then you set up ground rules for how you could communicate moving forward. Yeah. And there were all these sort of moments that you had throughout your career of recognizing whether it was Congressman Lewis or Congressman Lantos. So I'm just wondering, I mean, given all of that, but also given this current moment that we're in, do you still believe in that spirit of dialogue across difference and in what our public servants of today can do?
Well, you really did read my book.
I wasn't showing off. I was really,
I'm really
I could have
touched.
given a few more examples.
No, I'm really touched. Thank you so much for that. Democracy depends on heavy doses of civility. I mean, Dartmouth basically trains up leaders. This is generations at this school. So I know I'm talking to an awful lot of men and women who are going to serve the country in lots of public roles. And if those of you that make it to Congress, you will learn that there's all these arcane rules. You know about them, Emma, where will the gentlelady from New York yield? Will the gentleman is recognized? They seem kind of arcane and clumsy until you realize that these rules are designed to preserve civility in the dialogue. I mean, the truth is that in a free society and in representative government that we have, it's absolutely essential that you preserve a foundation of respect in the way you deal with one another so that you can identify where there's common cause. I mean, you mentioned several people that I served with along the way. I appreciate you mentioning the late John Lewis, who was a giant of the civil rights movement. He was beaten at the Edmund Pettus Bridge in 1965 on Bloody Sunday. And when I was first elected, I was honored to meet him. He was a hero of our progress toward a more perfect union in this country. Now, John, in my judgment, was wrong about almost everything. And he thought the same of me. Except I knew that he was a man very sincere about his faith, and I knew he was a great man whose personal courage had changed the nation, facilitated the passage of the Civil Rights Act. But I'll never forget the day when I was vice president. I went to the congressional baseball game. And it was equally kind of a divisive time. It was in my first year in office. And I'll never forget John, who I traveled to mark Bloody Sunday with my wife and 3 children at John's invitation. I co-led the annual pilgrimage to Selma to walk arm in arm across the Edmund Pettus Bridge with him. We had become great friends. But anyway, all these staffers, Democrats and Republicans, I think were a little bit aghast because when John came into the lobby at the baseball stadium, he just immediately made a beeline straight for me and threw his arms around me and said, "Congratulations, it's great to see you." And I don't think anybody was expecting that. But I actually was, because we were friends. We would fight hard on the House floor and in debates. But at the end of the day, we had developed a relationship on shared values and ideals that made it possible for us to find ways to work together. And I still believe that's not only the expectation of the American people, but it's how most of the people that I worked with in the House and the Senate operate on both sides of the aisle. I just attended Joe Lieberman's funeral recently. Just my wife and I flew in just because I deeply admired Senator Lieberman and saw him as a man of incredible character. It was actually a wonderful gathering then too. So I think we live in a time when divisiveness gets more attention, by and large. But I still think the majority of men and women that get up every day and serve in office at every level in this country do so out of a sense of calling, a sense of purpose, and a sense of doing what's right for America.
And thank you for that. Just to follow on to that, in a related vein, and you talked about this a little bit in the class, you wrote a piece about Confessions of a Negative Campaigner after your congressional run, before you became a member of Congress. Do you have the same perspective on negative campaigning now?
I do. I think negative personal attacks have no place in public life. Look, I think if you and I left here and had a good debate, we'd probably have a lot of stuff to debate.
Yes. Well, no, I mean,
I'm just guessing. But look, I can say you're wrong without saying you're a bad person. And I think it's really important to do that. Now, I didn't always do that. I'm a little embarrassed you read the whole book. Because seriously, so I came to a personal faith in college and then ended up having an opportunity to run for Congress when I was 29 years old. And we got involved in a couple of very competitive races, and they became very negative, and they were personally negative. And it was after that that I found myself reflecting on what my faith required of me. Not to be politically successful, but just to give a witness of what I truly believed in my heart. Namely, that you should do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Politics too often is do unto others before they do unto you, right? And so I wrote that essay after I'd lost 2 campaigns in a row, one of which became very negative, personal. I wrote Confessions of a Negative Campaigner. And I said, I think campaigns ought to be about 3 things. They ought to be about demonstrating the basic decency of the candidate, meaning you respect your opponent. Secondly, they ought to be about issues that are more important than your election. I mean, we've got major challenges in this country, at home and abroad. And I thought candidates shouldn't just spend campaigns talking about themselves. They ought to be talking about the future and what the solutions are. And then finally, the campaigns can be about winning. And I'm as competitive a person as you'll meet. I love to compete. But if you do it in that order, I think whether you win or lose, you end up lifting up the debate and leaving a legacy on policy that can serve the city, the state, and the nation.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we'll get to some related heavy subjects on public policy, the future of the Republican Party in a moment. But just briefly, a question that I think might be helpful for our students, which is politics can get intense sometimes, as you know better than anyone. How does Mike Pence unplug?
How do I unplug? Well, a couple of ways. I love riding horses. I really do. I'm not, I just quarter horses. I'm not any. I'm a gamer. Okay. I had like dinner one time when I was in Congress with Bill Gates. I'll never forget, all these congressmen and senators were sitting around and they were all, yes, sir, we're talking about these issues and very important issues. They came around to me and I said, well, it's nice to meet you, Bill, but mostly I'm just a gamer. I'm like Xbox, I'm talking Madden, and talking golf. I would do that. I surprised somebody the other day because I said when I was vice president, at least 1 hour on a Sunday, I would, if I could catch a moment after church, I would try and put my feet up and play whoever the Colts were playing. And,
How'd you do?
you Patriot fans, I'll tell you, we feel your pain. All right, it's not our year or yours, but so just letting down on that. But for us, for Karen and me, it's all about our family. We've got 3 great kids, married to 3 great people, and we just had our 4th grandchild born, little Thomas Henry Bond IV, little Tad. So we're incredibly blessed, and that's pretty much our whole world.
I wouldn't have guessed gamer. Plug him back in here. I'm
Didn't mean to
curious.
throw you on that.
I love it. Former President Trump has often referred to the bureaucracy as a deep state, as the agencies and departments of the federal government as filled with civil servants who are hostile to his political agenda, maybe hostile to his base and his constituency, and has pledged to revamp the civil service. And I wonder, do you share that sense that there's a deep state, that there's a hostile group that dominates America's civil service at the federal level?
Well, I think in some quarters of government there is, and part of it's the fault of the Congress. They yielded too much authority to the bureaucracy. But as Herschel and I were talking, I think one of the most important Supreme Court decisions in recent years was the decision that overturned Chevron deference and literally reset the balance between the bureaucracy's ability to create regulations and the obligation of the Congress to write laws that are clear. And if you haven't, some of the talented students in the room can look that up, but as a member of Congress, I have to tell you, we would, in my judgment, I think we have to get back to lawmakers doing the laws and not bureaucrats doing the laws. And so there's been a filling of the vacuum there, and some of it results in you running headlong into a bureaucracy that doesn't feel obligated to implement the agenda that you've been elected to advance. And I think that was it's been particularly true through the years with the State Department. And I know that there's look, our place in the world as leader of the free world is enormously important, but oftentimes strong American leadership on the world stage tends to run into an impasse in certain desks at the State Department. So I do think the time has come, and I haven't read deeply into what my former running mate is proposing with regard to civil service reform. But I think if you look back at history of this country, Teddy Roosevelt was really the last president to major civil service reform and ended a lot of abuse, and history records a lot of nepotism that dominated federal appointments. But I do think that the time has come for the kind of civil service reform that allows for greater flexibility for an incoming administration, whether it's Republican or Democrat, to staff these agencies with people that share and will move on the agenda that they were elected to advance.
Thank you.
So casting forward, if there's a Republican White House and/or Republican Congress, and you're asked to advise on what their priorities should be, and I mean the sort of big bucket of things that you've talking about earlier today, constraining government, what we just spoke about, the national debt, et cetera, huge issues, foreign policy, and then you have the so-called culture wars, abortion, definition of marriage, et cetera. How do you square using political capital on the latter when you've recognized that there's so much work to do on the former?
Well, I just think, if I understand your question, that we're moving into a time where the world's becoming more dangerous by the day. And it's going to be absolutely essential, whatever the outcome of the election next Tuesday, that America continue to provide leadership on the world stage. That's going to require us to make significant additional investments in our national defense. Right now, we spend about 3% of our GDP on national defense. I'm strongly of the opinion that we need to move that, as Senator Roger Wicker is proposing in the Senate, to 5%. When you look at the trend lines, particularly with regard to China's military investments, if we're going to continue to meet our obligations as leader of the free world, defend our nation, and stand with our allies, we need more resources. And so I think that's job one. I think related to that also is I think securing the southern border of the United States of America has to be a top priority. And so investments in national security, investments in border security. And then I think a very big debate next year is going to be about economic policy. I'm incredibly proud of the record of the Trump-Pence administration with regard to our national defense, with regard to pro-growth policies, energy, of course, Supreme Court and judicial appointments. But next year, a great amount of those tax cuts goes away at the end of 2025. And so our foundation in Washington is going to be working, I'm going to be speaking out about preserving those tax cuts, because at the end of the day, I think that the last thing that we should be doing is raising taxes on any American. Now, to do that, third item is we've got to come to terms with the national debt. And right now, I think I've made it clear at all of our venues today, I'm a conservative. I could never vote for Kamala Harris or Tim Walz. I know them. We differ profoundly on philosophy of government. But I'm not endorsing the Republican ticket. I'm staying out of it because I'm concerned about the direction of the Republican Party. I feel like the party, some voices in our party are starting to pull back from supporting our allies, notably in Eastern Europe. They're marginalizing the right to life. President and my ongoing difference about my constitutional duties. But now we live in a time when both political parties, Emma, are actually ignoring the national debt. I mean, for years, the Republican Party always had in our platform proposals for common sense reforms of what are called mandatory or entitlement programs. That was all dropped this year. And what we have with both political parties is simply a pledge not to ever touch Social Security or Medicare. And I don't think we should ever touch it for anyone that is anywhere close to retirement. We should make it clear to people, if you've got hair the same color as me, we're never going to touch the programs that affect you. But for these younger Americans out here, I think we need to produce leadership that is honest with the American people about $35 trillion of national debt going on $50 trillion national debt, and what that's going to mean to the quality of life, the vibrancy of our economy, our ability to defend the nation. And I think my hope is that the Congress, in some way, with maybe a bipartisan commission, is going to return to that question. But I've said many times today to Dartmouth students that this is an issue I hope this rising generation begins to speak about more, and demanding that the older generation square their shoulders and come up with solutions. because they're there. You can reform these programs in ways that you all would never notice and would actually give you a better deal at the end of the day. But it's going to take leadership to do it.
Thank you.
So we'll come to the future of the Republican Party and Trumpism in just a moment. But I did briefly want to follow up on the tail end of Emma's question about culture wars. And I want to do that by asking a social science question, if you'll indulge me. Which is, there's a lot of social science on religion and politics showing two things happening at once. One, showing a sort of steady decline in Americans' participation in formal religious institutions. And two, most of the best research suggesting that the causal reason for the decline in religious participation is the increasing tie that people perceive between religion and politics, which is to say, at least according to the social science, most Americans quite appreciate spirituality, religion, religious institutions. Most Americans don't really love politics, and the closer these have become, religion has sort of been on the decline. And I'm wondering if that makes sense and why that might be, and maybe how that might be remedied. Because I think our Associate Dean of Social Science over there, Ben Valentino, would tell us this is a pretty robust finding in the social science literature, at least.
John Adams was the first vice president. He's one of my favorites. I was the 48th. He said when he was president in a missive to military, he said that our form of government contemplates a deeply religious people, and it's wholly inadequate to the governance of any other. George Washington talked about encouraging religious sensibilities. Our founders ensured in the Constitution that the Congress would make no law regarding the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. But for the 200 years that preceded the American Revolution, as people in the room may well know, that many came here for religious freedom. And so I think the vitality of encouraging people to speak about their faith has always been an aspiration of mine. Always, I love the Bible says, always be prepared to give a reason for the hope that you have, but do so with gentleness and respect. I've always sought to do that, but I've always tried to let people know where I'm coming from. And I've tried to, as I said, however imperfectly, tried to live that out in my public life. But I would suggest to you that this is an enormously important question, and it's one that I would hope, whatever your religious tradition, whatever your interest, or none at all, that we would see and understand the value of people seeing the importance of faith in the life of the nation. I mean, there's one other people in the history of the world whose nation was founded on the principle that we're endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. But we were founded that way. And so I think that all that we can do to leave space for religious expression. I would tell you that you talk about the impact of politics on it. In my experience, and this is not out in Indiana or out among the American people, but it seemed like there was a distrust and hostility that I'd encountered over the years from people until they got to know me. You know, I'm a conservative, but I'm not in a bad mood about it, right? People know I believe what I believe, but you have every right. I'd fight to the death for your right to believe what you believe, or nothing at all. And I honestly think that we would do well as a nation to return to that principle of freedom and mutual respect. And at the end of the day, I'll continue to be a voice for that.
You're a conservative, and you still see, as I understand it, your experience, having run for president, is that Republican voters themselves are also conservatives. And and yet the party seems to have moved away, at least from the conservatism that animated your public involvement all your life. How do you explain what's going on, and how do you see the future of the Republican Party?
Well, this won't be popular with some people in the room, but I'll just say it. I honestly think that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have weakened the country at home and abroad, and people are just anxious for a change among Republicans. And but when I was running for president last year, and thanks for noticing, I appreciate that. A lot of times reporters would say, well, the problem for Mike Pence, and they mentioned Nikki Haley too, who are running as conservatives, they say, the problem with Mike Pence, Nikki, and others is that they're running in a party that, quote, doesn't exist anymore. I have to tell you, that wasn't my experience. Everywhere I campaigned in New Hampshire, everywhere, live free or die state, everywhere I campaigned in Iowa and around the country, people would come up to me after events and say, boy, I'm talking about Republicans now, and they'd come up and say, I really agree with you. You're so right about the national debt. You're so right about American leadership in the world. You're so for that. But I think there were other factors, other cross currents, anxiety about the current administration that created a dynamic in our primary. But I don't think it was walking away from our principles. It's one of the reasons while I'm staying out of the presidential race on our side, I wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal that if anybody here or looking on loses interest in this conversation, you can Google it. It was a couple weeks ago, where I said, look, the presidential ticket will run on the agenda they're running on, but I encourage candidates for the House and Senate to just run on that conservative agenda. Because I really do believe it's still, and notably about American leadership in the world, but also pro-growth policies, broad-based, low tax rate, dealing with the national debt, standing for the right to life. And I really believe it's not only the right positions, as I hold in my convictions, but I also think it's a winning agenda, and we've been encouraging people to continue to stand on it. But almost irrespective of the outcome Tuesday, and I didn't come here to handicap it.
You're not going to tell us what's going to happen.
Yeah, no, not in New Hampshire. We usually, in Indiana, we look to New Hampshire, so you tell us what happens. But, almost irrespective, there'll be a debate that begins in the Republican Party. And I look forward to being some part of that debate. And it's not because I think that these conservative principles that I embrace are the way the Republican Party wins. I actually think, as I wrote in that piece, it's how America wins. A strong national defense, American leadership on the world stage, fiscal responsibility, pro-growth policies, respect for traditional values, and the rule of law. That's how America wins.
If I could just follow up, looking back to 2016, I mean, so most of people like you who were sitting governors at the time, Republican members of Congress, very few of them endorsed Donald Trump in 2016. They endorsed more traditional conservative candidates, whether it was Cruz or Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio. And yet Trump, of course, won the nomination. How do you explain, looking back, the rise of Donald Trump in American politics and in the Republican Party?
Yeah, well, I honestly think the president successfully tapped into a great frustration of the American people. The way I put it in that campaign was, I said, the American people are tired of being told. They're tired of being told this is as good as it gets, or tired of being told that their values are antiquated. And as I would quote another president and say, they're also tired of being told that a little intellectual elite in a far distant capital can plan our lives better for us than we can plan them ourselves. I would say that in front of crowds in that campaign, and the affirmation that I received really told me that we were pretty close to the point. And I actually think it's part of the former president's enduring appeal. I think there's a great sense that a small distant capital in Washington, D.C. has been playing too big a role in our lives, and he's continued to give voice to everyday Americans in ways that's that's engendered his support. So, but at the end of the day, the American people get to decide. I mean, he always had a lot of fun referring to it, but I actually endorsed somebody else in the Indiana primary in 2016. So you can imagine when I got a phone call and was asked if I was interested in being considered as his running mate, my daughter looked at me, I'll never forget, she said, well, Dad, we all saw this coming. I said, I didn't. Of course, the president would also oftentimes tease, he said that my non-endorsement was nicer than most of the endorsements he got. Because I did acknowledge that he had touched a nerve with people in my state. He had given voice to the collective aspirations of many Republicans, many independents, and some Democrats. And so for me, it ultimately comes down to what the American people decide. And they'll make another decision come Tuesday.
We have a lot of students in the room who might be interested in becoming public servants themselves, and
Hope so.
yes. Why do you hope so? Please give them some advice if you can.
Because public service is an honorable profession. It is absolutely essential for the nation that men and women of integrity are willing to step forward and serve. So my advice to every one of you is, first and foremost, speak your dreams. That's always been my test when I was governor, when I was vice president, when I was congressman. I'd meet a young family, not as young as yours. His daughter was heading to trick-or-treating tonight, which I'm still a little uncomfortable that you invited Mike Pence on Halloween. I remember there were actually costumes with my face for a while. But I would always say to young people when they're kind of very shyly, I'd say, well, what are you interested in doing? And they'd be, well, maybe someday, maybe, I might want to run for office. And I'd always say, well, you passed the first test. They said, what's that? And I said, you got to speak your dreams. You got to go tell people you want to serve. It's a very honorable thing. And then secondly, is I would tell anyone, whatever your politics are, just show up. I'll never forget when I decided to join the Republican Party. I just moved to Indianapolis, and I think it's in the book. You might have read it. I went down to the Marion County Republican headquarters, and I walked into the chairman's office, and he was a very, very large man, sitting behind a very old desk. And I walked in, and I stuck my hand out, and I said, I'm Mike Pence, and I'm here to join the Republican Party. He kind of looked at me and he said, well, it's not actually something you joined. He said, we don't have voter registration in Indiana, but he said, we're glad to have you. I thought it was a big deal. He obviously didn't. But I just showed up. I worked as a precinct committeeman. My wife, the same. We both worked at the local level. We supported local candidates. And so speak your dreams and then show up. And I'll tell you what, be ready. Because I got to tell you, the Dartmouth students, the incredible caliber of the students in this room, the families you all represent, I guarantee you start showing up, people are going to put you to work, and then they're going to have a lot of ideas about how you can serve the country. And I hope you embrace it.
Thank you.
We've got about 5 minutes. And if you'll indulge me before we get to a real final question from Professor Muirhead, can we do a lightning round? A lightning round of 5 to 6 quick questions about the highlights and lowlights of Mike Pence's career as a public servant. Quick 5 to 6 quick questions. We'll see if this works. One, best thing about being vice president that we don't know about. What do you miss most from being vice president?
The plane.
Good answer. Best moment as vice president of the United States.
It's hard to put anything other than that day I raised my right hand. Looked out on the National Mall. You got to understand, my grandfather in 1923 stepped off a boat onto Ellis Island from Ireland. And that's how Richard Michael Crawley became an American. And that was how Michael Richard Pence got to stand on a platform, raise my right hand, and take the oath of office as Vice President of the United States. And this is an incredible country, and I was humbled by that moment, and unless I get another turn up on that platform, I don't think anything will ever equal it.
Best moment as a parent?
I think the best moment, Karen and I went through about 5 years of unexplained infertility when we were first married. And families maybe present here or looking on who've been through that know that that's a heartbreaking time, and it's a discouraging time. And Karen and I ended up going through a number of fertility procedures. But I'll never forget pulling over to a gas station. I was fully prepared. I put a quarter into what's called a pay phone. We'll explain that to you later, or you can Google it. Pulled over to a gas station because I know Karen wasn't going to get the results of the latest. And she picked up the phone and just said, "Happy Father's Day." And I think they could hear me shout in the next county. And better part of 9 months later, our son Michael showed up, then Charlotte, then Audrey. But that moment of God's grace in our family is hard to compare in our life.
Just two more of these. And thanks so much for sharing all of this. One thing you do over as vice president?
Well, can I do it a little broader than that? One of the regrets in my life is that I had an interest in high school and serving in the military. I know I just talked to a Marine here. My son, as I mentioned, is a major in the Marine Corps. My unworthy son-in-law is a lieutenant in the Navy. But I had this thought that I wanted to serve in the military, but I got away from it. My father was a combat veteran in the Korean War, and I'll never forget my dad, when I came home with a fistful of Marine Corps brochures, my senior year in high school, I said to Dad, "I'm going to join the Marine Corps," and he said, "You're going to college." He said, "If you want to be a Marine after that, you can go be a Marine after that." And I never got back to it. And to be honest with you, I wish I had. It's not for everybody, I understand that, but I would tell you, having been a vice president, visited troops around the world, when I was a member of Congress, after we voted to authorize the use of force in Afghanistan and Iraq, I made a point to visit troops overseas every single year for 10 years. As I thought, if you're going to vote to send them there, you ought to at least go look in on your people. And I would say to anyone within the sound of my voice today that if you're not quite sure what you might want to do right after Dartmouth, putting on the uniform of the United States is something I don't think you'd ever regret. I encourage you to do it. Still wish I had.
One more of these, and then we'll turn it over to Professor Muirhead. One thing that you would do over as a parent, other than sending your daughter to the bastion of liberalism that is Yale Law School.
Yeah, she made it through Yale. I'm proud of her. She's just an incredible person. Yeah, you'd like her a lot. She's brilliant and just has a heart for service. But as a parent, to be honest with you, we've just been incredibly blessed. I don't mean to dodge the question, but it's we made a decision that not a lot of people elected to Congress make, and that was our kids were 5, 6, and 7 when I was elected to Congress in the year 2000. And we just loaded them in the minivan. We found a house to rent in suburban Washington, D.C., and kids lived with me during the school year when I was in Congress. I wrote a book with my daughter that I'd also recommend, currently available. It's entitled Go Home for Dinner. But for us, it was, we wanted our family close. I didn't want to miss those days. I just tweeted a couple of pictures from Halloween. And candidly, I would have missed those Halloweens if I'd have been off in Washington, D.C., and they were back in Indiana. But some people would ask me sometimes, they say, wasn't that a little risky, moving your family to Washington, keeping a home back in Indiana, and when people take that the wrong way politically, and I said, for me, I always made a point to thank my constituents for supporting us, keeping our family together. And you fast forward to that fateful day we started talking about today. A lot of people know that I was there. People don't know that my wife was there the whole night, wouldn't leave. My daughter was there at the Capitol the whole time, wouldn't leave. And when we were fashioning those remarks on the floor of the Senate, I was on the phone with my Yale daughter, with my Marine son. And what we do as a family. And so those are decisions that we've made that have really been a blessing in our life. But doing everything that you can as you go forward, whatever your dreams are, just keep the most important people in your life close, and you'll be stronger and better for it.
Thanks.
Mr. Vice President, it's been real pleasure and an inspiration spending the day with you today, and watching you engage so generously and so thoughtfully with our students. I think if you hadn't gone into public service, you would have been a brilliant teacher, and I say that really from the heart. I'm
going to drop a resume.
We got a class that might need you.
I don't think so. Thank you. Thank you, though, by that.
And one of the things I really found instructive was watching you today engage students who, look, we all just feel a profound debt of gratitude to you for what you did on January 6th and admire you unspeakably for that. And then at the same time, of course, some students and some people disagree with you profoundly about issues that are really fundamental. And I'm watching you engage students who disagree with you today about gay marriage was really instructive. It's not easy to dialogue across a difference like that. And looking out more broadly at our country today, what we see, what so many people see, is a country that is riven, a country that is so deeply divided. There's a story in the Times today about how, liberals are moving to liberal neighborhoods and conservatives, and we're not even encountering each other on the sidewalk anymore. And in this fractured time, in this polarized time, do you have any words for us about how we could be one nation after all? Do you have any words for us about how we might approach this country in this moment of fracture and division?
Well, number one, I'm humbled by your words about today. I'm incredibly impressed with Dartmouth students. We've had just some wonderful moments today, and I told your president that today, and I'll tell each one of you. It's a very special place. You can give yourselves a round of applause. I'm telling you what, this is an amazing.
They're all right. They're all right.
Amazing student body. Now, I'll be a little counterintuitive with you, though, Russ. I really will. I think our politics is more divided than ever before in my lifetime. But I'm not convinced the American people are as divided as our politics. When we left office, the first decision Karen and I made is we're moving home to Indiana. We bought 5 acres and a pond. I got a riding mower, John Deere 54-inch deck, 0-turn radius. Got a red pickup truck. We just went home. But I tell people, you get 15 miles out of Washington, D.C., the people in this country actually get along pretty well. Most days. They do. And live next door to people they may differ with, but the Americans find a way to go forward. And whether it be in business or whether it be in education, can we improve? Sure, but I think the American people have largely got it figured out. It's just in public life, I like to say we need government as good as our people. We need government that has the principle, the generosity, the innovation, but also the respect that the American people should show one another just about every day. Now, this is obviously it's a very contentious time right now, and should be. Americans are in the midst of a vigorous debate about the direction of the country and who our national leadership will be, and who the leadership of the Senate and the House and governorship here. I'm a great admirer of Kelly Ayotte, but people in New Hampshire to make your decision. But at the end of the day, I have great confidence in the American people, and great confidence that we're going to rise to this challenge. We're going to meet this moment. We're going through a season where we're talking past each other too much in politics, but it'll come back around. I mean, I really believe that with all my heart. And a study of American history, as Winston Churchill said, and we let him get away with this because his mother was an American. Winston Churchill said, a careful study of American history shows that after they've exhausted every other possibility, the American people always do the right thing. And we will again. We're going to deal with this national debt. We're going to solve it. We're going to meet the moment on the world stage as leader of the free world. We're going to find a way forward to respect one another's values, but respect one another's liberties. I have no doubt in my mind. It's just we need a generation of leaders that are committed to that, and I think they're coming. And I'll bet a lot of them are in this room. So be encouraged. My faith is in God and in the American people. Our best days are ahead.
Sir, thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed.